Well, hello, humans. What a delight to see you all here. Thank you so much for having me at your wonderful new campus in this wonderful new space. And I actually got into town yesterday, so I did have a little bit of a chance to drive around and check things out. And of course, I had to see the Walmart Museum. Super interesting. Yeah, I heard somebody cheer. That's a good instinct. It's a good instinct. That was a great way to get an overview of Walmart's incredible journey with technology and innovation. That's fantastic. And in fact, the museum really showcases that Walmart's always been at the forefront of innovation. And this guy had something to tell me.
My name is Sam Wall. I'm speaking to you today thanks to some remarkable improvements in technology and communication.
Remarkable improvements in technology and communication, right? That's pretty amazing. That was incredible. And it was my favorite part of the museum until I stepped out and saw this. And I love this. I was like, man, I thought I was really showing up on brand with my blue blazer and everything, but like she took it to a whole other level. Dolly always sets the bar a little higher, which is funny because speaking of higher, I shared a stage with Dolly, and I got about a foot over her. So if I tried to wear this costume, it would come to about here on me. But anyway, she's got twice the presence I do in any room, so, you know, she is quite a dynamo. All of that to say, I think it's really interesting that, you know, whether it's holograms bringing founders to life, or, you know, custom couture to celebrate company culture, or your keynote speaker showing up in brand colors, it's clear that attention to detail and innovation go hand in hand here at Walmart. We just saw several examples of that from your colleagues. Pretty incredible stuff. I'm still stuck with the 90% reduction in the one metric. But that kind of thing matters more than ever now, as I think you're probably all aware, because everywhere I go, I'm hearing the same refrain from everybody I work with. And I don't know, I'm wondering if this resonates with you, that everything is changing too fast. Is there anybody that feels that way? It's a safe space. You can raise your hand if that resonates. I'm declaring it a safe space. Cool, I see some hands, I see some nodding heads. Yeah, I think that's a pretty normal feeling. And Rob very jokingly, you're right, my title is very long, my subtitle is very long. But that world that's changing too fast piece of the subtitle is a really important component, because I think people do feel that. And the executives and leaders I work with across all different industries all say the same thing. In fact, there's one other thing that I hear very often from people, and I'm very curious to hear if this resonates with you too, and that is this: the future is looking pretty uncertain. How about that? Does that feel? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads and raised hands there too. So I think it's a really important thing to hold some space for, because it's true. I think a lot of us are feeling those tensions. Although I think it's also important that we unpack that a little bit and talk about why, some of what's going on behind all of that. And one of the things that I know that Rob gave you a little bit of my background, but because I got to be one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, I don't remember if you've mentioned that part. I was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, and one of the things that I got to witness as a result of that was some really pretty incredible visionary decision-making happening. I got my own stories to tell, and I'll bring up one or two of those throughout the rest of our time together, but this one is not about me. This is about the leadership of the company and the decisions they made. And by the way, I wasn't at this Netflix. I was at this Netflix, just to be clear. Does anyone remember this Netflix? Okay, we got some people who were old timers. All right, fair enough, fair enough. This was, you know, the DVD rental Netflix. And this was like 99, 2000 or so, that you would think, because we were up against an 800-pound gorilla in the competitive marketplace, which was Blockbuster, yes. And Blockbuster, like I've said, this is 99, 2000 that I'm talking about, and Blockbuster didn't like peak out until 2004. So we were still very much up against a growing 800-pound gorilla. in that space. So you would think that what would happen if you were leading a startup company at that time trying to take on that marketplace is that you would dedicate all of your time, all of your resources, all of your people, and all of their talent to solving that problem. And somewhat that's true, that's what happened. But Reed Hastings and the leadership team also allocated a pretty good amount of time and money into research and development toward set-top boxes, which were the predecessor to streaming as we now know it. And so you got a chance to see the visionariness of that come to fruition because Roku didn't come along as the first standalone set-top box streaming player until 2006, and Netflix didn't have its streaming plan in place until 2007. So you think that's almost a decade. And I don't know how much you know about Silicon Valley startups, but they move pretty fast. So you're talking about dog years when you're thinking about almost a decade. And that's the kind of visionary thinking that meant that this Netflix turned into this Netflix that we all know and love or know and hate or whatever your disposition is toward Netflix at this point. Totally fine. But the point is, there are decisions that get made that change the trajectory of the future. And so the question is it that the future is so uncertain, or is it more undecided? And that's what I want to unpack a little bit with you, is because I believe that what matters next in the way that we look at the future is to really make future-ready decisions. I'll tell you what I mean by that, because really when we talk about the future, there are some ways that we talk about the future that I think really don't serve us. There are some ways that we talk about the future that I think we gather from science fiction, and we haven't necessarily kind of disabused ourselves of the notions that come along with those ideas. So I want to tell you what the future isn't, and then I'll talk about what the future is. Because what the future isn't is, I think we only really learn to talk about the future in this duality, this versus that. Does anyone know what I'm referencing? One of them is dystopia, and the other is utopia, yes. Dystopia versus utopia, right? It's the way we talk about the future. Anytime you hear about some new scientific breakthrough or tech breakthrough, very often you're thinking about, like, how bad is this going to be? Right? And the reason you're thinking about how bad is this going to be is because most of us don't think that utopia is so much on the table. You know what I'm saying? Like, most of us would agree that every decision isn't going to be made so perfectly that we're going to be living in an all too perfect ideal on Earth, right? So that means that every way we process the future is just shades of dystopia. Can you see how unhealthy that is? How unproductive that is? And so I would like to propose that we just do away with this model completely. I think this model doesn't serve us. And what I think we need instead, you're probably like, wait, I need that. No, you don't need that. And you can still talk about science fiction that way. I'm going to let you keep it for that. But for talking about your actual future, the future of your company, the future of your work, the future of the projects that you work on, I want to give you a more productive way to talk about the future. Because here's what I'm going to explain. I think that what the future is a lot simpler. And so I got a clear blank slide here so that we can just like take a breath. And so will you all just please take a breath with me right now? Yeah. The future is just the time that's just in front of us. Fair enough, so far, right? And it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions that we've already taken in the past, as well as those we're about to take today. Does that make sense? Does that feel like more empowering? You want me to say it again? Here it is. The future is the time just in front of us, and is at least partly knowable or predictable. At least partly. Because it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions we've already taken and those we're about to take today. And see, here's why I think this is so relevant, because the way that dystopia versus utopia actually plays out is that we're talking about the things that we fear, that's dystopia, and the things that we hope for, and that's utopia. And what I actually propose instead is to use a model that I call strategic optimism. And it's a way of saying, look, we know that there are actual risks. We need to manage those. In any new thing, there are risks to manage. And equally, we need to articulate what we hope for, what we would like to see happen, and then actually work toward that vision. And we need to make sure that these things work together. We need to make a disciplined, strategic plan that acknowledges what could go wrong and what we want to go right. So how many of you spend a lot of time in meetings where you talk about what could go wrong in projects? That should be every hand in the room. I know this. This is true everywhere. How many of you talk about what could go right in projects? There may be a few, because there usually are by now. When I first started talking about this, there were never any. Now I think people are starting to catch on to this idea. But it should be much more common. We need to be talking about both of these sides. Both of these sides of what could go wrong, what could go right. Let's make sure we're managing to both of those visions, because that integrated view is actually how we get to a brighter future. So that is strategic optimism. That is part of how we decide better, how we build that better future we want. Because what I hear, so I'm often regarded as a futurist, and the media will ask questions about what is the future going to be of retail? What is the future going to be of electric cars, or the future of AI? And I actually think that this is a really interesting construct, right? Like just asking what is the future going to be. And I think it's not a very useful question. What's interesting is to step back from that question and recognize that every question that we ask about the future is also a question about the past. Do you see what I mean? We're trying to examine why we are concerned about or wondering about what the future is going to be. And so we have to look at what the decisions and actions we've already taken are going to have already been. Right? I already explained, we talked about this a couple times now, right? That the future is the time ahead of us, and it is at least partly knowable or predictable because it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions that we've already made, as well as those we're going to make today. And that I talk about in my new book as the now-next continuum. It's the idea that we connect these ideas, we can see the through line, the continuity of the decision-making, and we can shape the future by making these decisions and asking better questions. So how might we ask a better question than what is the future going to be? Because we can't actually get good results without asking good questions. So one way that, and I actually think it's worth expounding on this point for just one moment, because I actually think that meaningful questions are far more valuable than sensible answers. You follow me? A meaningful question you can keep asking again and again. A sensible answer is only going to be good in this context, in this time frame, for the given set of externalities and contexts, right? But a meaningful question, you could ask it again tomorrow, you could ask it again next year, and bring in all new information, and you're going to get a new sensible answer that you can respond to. So given all that, what is a better question that we could ask rather than what is the future going to be? What is the future we want to create is perhaps a better question. You know what I mean? Because you're the ones who are making the decisions about how we're going to implement these new technologies. You're showing us in your examples the tell me something good. Sorry, it's going to be stuck in all our heads for the rest of the day. Might as well just sing it together. You're creating the future with these wonderful projects. And it's wonderful that that's the way that it works, because I actually see this as a model that works the best in organizations when you can connect what your business objectives are with what the human outcomes you're trying to affect, and weave that together with the technological capabilities that you have, and look for where that overlap happens naturally, and that is what I call tech humanism. And that tends to lead to the ability to find synergistically the purposeful human experiences at scale that are meaningful, where you're actually looking for the chance to serve the people who interact with your brand, with your company, through what they're already trying to do organically, and using technological capabilities to amplify that alignment between your business and the people outside the business, as opposed to merely trying to use technology to make your business more effective. You see the distinction? I think it's a really key one. And so in service of that, I want to get into a little bit more about how we think about these tech humanist principles. And one of the tech humanist principles I would love to unpack with you has to do with trust and trust building. And so in service of that, I have a downloadable that you're all welcome to. You can hit this with your phone. Go ahead and grab that. It's also, I believe, going to be sent around to you. So if you don't get a chance to get it now, I think you'll still have a chance. There are going to be some slides that I put up here for like a second and then move right on from them, and you're going to be like, oh, I wish I'd gotten a picture of that. And I believe they're coming your way, so don't stress too much, but you're welcome to take pictures of any of the slides that look like they're going to be good references for you going forward. Feel free to grab this. This will take you to my website, and you can download it from there. You do not need to put your email address in to get it. You're welcome to if you'd like to join my mailing list, but not necessary. What this is going to be a checklist, a couple of sanity check questions for how you're implementing AI. And every one of the tell me something good examples really seemed like it kind of followed intuitively what some of these guidelines are. So we're already so intuitively doing the right things, but this will help us feel more confident, I think, as more and more projects come to fruition within the organization. Another way to reframe that what is the future going to be question, so that we're asking a better question, is to think about futures, plural, as opposed to future. Right? I think too often we think about the future as this kind of one-shape deterministic thing, and it's just that's what's going to happen, and we don't think about the fact that there are many ways that the future can unfold, and we get a lot of influence over that. So we come back to the now-next continuum. If we were to take any question, anything we're considering about, how might implementing new superstores in those different store examples that we were talking about earlier, how might that play out? And we might have to think about all the different ways. You can see these gray lines, the possible outcomes. How might it play out if this condition is true? How might it play out if this condition is true? And a lot of different ways that things could take shape. Play it out with the projects that are on your plate and start thinking about how the different possible outcomes might play out. But there's something that you'll notice in there too, which is that one of those possible outcomes is a more probable outcome. And that is to say that out of any given question that you're asking about the future, there is one outcome that is most likely, if you're really true and objective and kind of being intellectually honest, you can say this is the one that's most likely to happen at present, knowing what we know. And you can see that preferred future line too. There is something you most want to have happen. And so what becomes the job, what becomes the opportunity is to close the gap between the preferred and the probable. This $1 million question is simply, or $90 million question, or whatever, however it plays out in your particular project, what are the actions that you need to take? What are the decisions that you need to make in order to steer those outcomes from the most probable that you can anticipate to the way that you would like to see it play out? What can you do to close the gap? And the way I see this play out across a lot of different decision-making and future scenarios in many organizations is that there tends to be two ways that future readiness or decision-making falls down. It goes one extreme or the other. We're either hesitating too much, or we're jumping in without having necessary understanding about the consequences of the decisions that we're making. So there's one or the other, and you can think about this timeline, about this now-next continuum, and how these fall along that timeline. So we need to understand certain things before we can implement a given, like let's say AI technology. Let's say that we know there's a particular kind of AI tool that we would like to implement, but in this particular case, if we think about how that might play out, we don't quite know the conditions yet for how we would need to implement that. And we need to be cautious on that one. On the other side, we might think about a particular kind of AI implementation and recognize that we have everything we need to know, and every day we delay is a day that we're costing the company and costing our opportunity by millions potentially of dollars, right? we have to have increasingly sophisticated ability to understand the difference between these things. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to hone our ability to recognize when we are falling too much on the side of sacrificing the future for the present, and when we're sacrificing the present for the future. And that's really challenging right now, because it's the case that AI and other emerging technology is adding capacity and scale like we've never seen before, right? What we need to know is that the actions and decisions that we take are having outsized consequences. And that looks like a few things we all recognize, right? We know what outsized consequences look like. We know polarization. We know smartphone addiction. We know the biases, and we know the impacts of all these different tools. So we need to recognize that this is true. This is part of that yes and, right? These things are true, and we also need to recognize that the data model that we build today is shaping the algorithms that will make decisions tomorrow, and the algorithms we shape today are shaping the machine learning models of tomorrow. This is all true too. So it really is the case that everything we do in data today is no less than shaping society tomorrow. These things are all connected, and it's really important that we're clear and honest about that. And at the same time, we have the opportunity to do really incredible things with these technologies when thought through in really careful ways, when we do them well, and when we make our experiences and interactions worthy of trust. And that's where this trust thing comes into play. So trust in trustworthy leadership and trustworthy technology is what I'd like to unpack just a little bit with you here. So there's different kinds of trust, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could talk about whether you trust your leaders, whether you trust your partner. This is one example of that. I don't know how you feel about this, but when I see these like cake smash videos from weddings, I'm just like, you're starting out your relationship by smashing a cake in each other's faces? Like, that doesn't feel very trust building. But to each their own. I'm not criticizing, it just makes me cringe. I don't want that in a relationship. You might feel differently. Trust isn't necessarily about the perfect processes or the perfect dynamics. It's about good faith relationships. It's about believing that you're entering into a good faith relationship with someone. And so to that end, when we think about how that plays out in technology at scale, we can look at that as having three main components. There may be others, but these are the three that I tend to focus on. And they are transparency, agency, and accountability. And I'll just examine them a little more closely one by one, and we'll start with accountability. So I think accountability is one that is super obvious, and yet sometimes a little hard to think about how does this play out? How does this really meet the real world? And so I think clear responsibility for the decisions we make with AI and tech, thinking about how they affect humanity, human beings, rights, opportunities, and well-being. Those are really important decisions and thoughts to have about accountability. There are so many examples that we could talk about of this going wrong, but one maybe kind of playful way that I've seen this, and that you've seen this too, probably in various ways, is, I don't know how many of you caught this when this was happening, but it was a time when if you searched Google and typed in, when did Snoopy assassinate Abraham Lincoln, it would confidently tell you April 14th, 1865. And obviously that is the date in which Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, but not by Snoopy, in case that wasn't clear. So, I mean, understandable disconnect in the data model, understandable like overconfidence in the way it's serving out information, but who's accountable? Who's accountable for serving up this wrong information? Who's accountable for when we make decisions based on wrongly served information? And there's far more consequential examples of this. So we need to know that trust me, the tech works is not good enough in almost any interaction. It's simply going to have to do better. It's going to have to show its work. We need systems that are letting us know how they're making decisions. And I'm so relieved I got to hear these presentations a little while ago, because so many people talked about explainable AI and talked about the transparency that goes on into the systems. And transparency is the next one we want to unpack, because that is key in understanding not just how the systems work, but try to understand how their limitations and the values that are encoded in their design are helping to make the decisions, or helping to recommend the decisions that we make based on what's suggested. And I think this is a really, it's easy to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, confound this with accountability. But one way to look at this in clarity is to think about the nutrition facts on a food label. Right? It's very transparent what's in a kind of food. Right? If you pick up a food item and it's labeled with nutrition facts, you expect that to be accurate. You expect it to tell you everything that's in it and not leave anything out. You expect to be able to get a full reckoning, right? Whereas, if you look at this example of how Facebook is labeling AI-generated content at the moment, this is not a full accounting of what we can see within this content. We're not necessarily getting all the data that we need in order to know, can we make decisions on this data? Now, obviously, making a decision about a cat is probably not the most consequential piece of data that's going to be in your typical day. But there are going to be far more consequential examples than this, and you need to feel confident that you're getting the right information to make the right decision. And so, like the last piece of this trifecta, this agency piece, giving people meaningful control of how their data is used and how AI systems interact with them, I think this is one that when we think about inside like B2B operations, inside of companies, it may feel like this isn't as important as when you're serving up an app or something like that, but it can be really crucial to make sure that you're showing the right kind of interaction to get the right kind of interaction back from people. One of the things that I like to illustrate this with is if you are thinking about how you guys know that the closed door button doesn't work on most elevators, right? Right, okay, so are you giving people the illusion that they have some kind of control in the interactions that they have, or do they actually have the opportunity to change the course of the decision making, to influence the outcomes? I think this is an opportunity for us to think about how nudges can be used in good ways. I loved the example of prompting the managers for clearer safety instructions, right? Like being able to say, look, if you just give a little bit more definition about what was going wrong, it will probably lead to people understanding better the direction they're being given, and generally that will lead to safer outcomes. You can see how that works. It's a very clear sequence of events. But you can also see how nudges can be used for not good, and you can see how if we don't make it clear what our intentions are, then we have, I don't know, how many are Duolingo nerds in this room like me? Oh, cool, my people are here. All right, I am a total language nerd. I love my Duolingo. So I don't mind that Duolingo is constantly nudging me to get back in the app and do more lessons. That's fine. But I do have a problem with my former employer doing this constantly. Like, we're just gonna go right into the next episode. Is that cool? Yeah, that's cool, right? We're just gonna start that right up. And I think that's problematic. But speaking of my former employer and that nudge, I think another way that we can illustrate some of what we're talking about is yet another Netflix story. This is one that I think will help to connect some of the dots in what we're talking about with these AI initiatives. Because so when I joined the company as one of the first 100 employees, I was the first content manager. And the content database had all these movies in it, but it had one flaw, one limitation that I noticed right away. And I think before I share this with you, I should ask, for the sake of making it a safe space, are there movie fans in the room? Okay, all right, cool. I'm giving you a content warning. You can hold on to the edges of your seat if this is going to be upsetting. Because there was only one genre allowed per movie. What? Ocean's 11, how many genres does that have? It's 11 genres in that movie. It's crazy to think that in 1999, anybody would have built a movie database and thought, yeah, we can get away with one genre per movie. Well, so as soon as I recognized that, I was like, that's not going to scale. We have to fix that limitation. And so we did. And so it being less than 100 people, almost all of us worked together on this. The database team, the product team, the engineering team, my content team, editorial team, et cetera, et cetera. broke it down, built it back up, made all the associations again. And so you can see, these multiple genre associations now exist on movies. And because of that gritty, ugly work that we all did, it was truly gritty and ugly. Because of that, in the 25 years since then, the company has been using machine learning against the content database, running it against it and looking for patterns, right? Looking for what you watch, what I watch, and trying to find some ways to recognize where are there patterns to surface. And so you've probably seen these kinds of things. These are actually screenshots from my account, so you can get a little glimpse at my movie taste. But political auteur cinema, this is not a genre, but this is kind of a category that can be sussed out, that can be created by machine learning and surfaced and made visible into the user experience so that I can find movies that might be of interest to me, like Oscar-winning 20th century period pieces, which I do really like that category. Those are some of my favorite movies. But this wouldn't have been possible without 25 years ago, the ugly, gritty work we did to fix that genre limitation. It also wouldn't be possible without machine learning for the last 25 years of the investment that's been made in trying to get better and better at using AI. This is one of those situations where it really pays to understand there are things you do to catch up, and there are things you do to get ahead, right? When you're behind the externalities and the things that need to be done, that's transformation work. That's the kind of stuff that you're catching up, you're trying to get to baseline, trying to get to where you need to be, right? When you're ahead of those externalities and you're thinking about things nobody else is thinking about, that's hardcore innovation work, right? And that's the distinction we can see in the genre example, and you can also see it on the now-next continuum. Because when you're catching up and asking about what is already known and knowable and moving yourself to the current moment, that's transformational reactive work. When you're thinking, how could I do something that no one else in my space is doing, you're getting ahead, you're being proactive. That's when you're bringing that Reed Hastings CEO level thinking into your decision making. And we could all use a little more of that. So I will ask you this question: what is the genre project in your environment? I bet there is one. In your work, in your workspace, your day-to-day. And I see a bunch of heads just kind of going down like this, like, oh, I know exactly what it is. Yeah, we all have those. And they're things that we ought to confront because they're things that we need to do to catch up, and they're things we need to do to think ahead, right? I think one of the things that this also surfaces for us is that when we think about the power of AI, that we can also think about purpose-built workflows, that we have the opportunity not to simply build into the existing set of limitations that we have, but instead to clean those up and to make sure, because AI can reshape what's possible, we need to think about making sure that what's possible is expansive, that we're thinking about how we not just digitize our current workflows, but rethink them entirely, but do it in terms of purpose. One of the things I love about being here is that I really get the feeling like everybody really lives and breathes the Walmart purpose. I think that's very, very cool. Not every organization can say that. And believe me, I speak to a lot of organizations. I work with a lot of different companies. And there are plenty of people inside plenty of companies who are like, yeah, that doesn't feel true here. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's an incredible opportunity for you to take that purpose and really infuse that into how you're rethinking the way that you can use AI to better serve the organization and better serve associates and better serve customers. Because transformation unpacks into a whole lot of messy different things. We need to be thinking about how the workplace changes, how business models change, how supply chain changes, how we personally and emotionally and societally change as a result of these different transformations. It's really important for us to be honest about that. And we also have to recognize that there is not going to be an option with AI skills going forward. every one of us is going to have to advance. So with this slide is a bit of an eye chart, but what it's actually saying is that more and more job descriptions are including AI skills, and we're going to see that become increasingly the norm. So it behooves us to get better and better at the skills that we need using AI and make sure we're comfortable with that. I also feel like it's important to unpack, though, that when we talk about the future of work, that sometimes we conflate that with the future of jobs. Like, we sometimes talk about the future of work and future of jobs as if they're the same thing, and they're kind of not. Like, one is a much more employer-centric lens, and one is a much more human-centric lens. And I think that's a really important distinction to be able to be clear about. And the future of tasks and the future of productivity are also very different. And so when we talk about how we make sure the future of work is, how work is future ready, we also have these little asterisks alongside it where we need to make sure we're being very clear about how humans are future ready within the work that they do, how we make sure that jobs are future ready, how we make sure that tasks and productivity are future ready. Because it is ultimately, in most organizations, in most contexts, going to be some mix of humans and machines working together, side by side, or whatever incarnation it takes. And it's really complicated because I don't know how many of you are familiar with this set of images, but years ago, I started using this image, and I would just show this, and people would laugh like you just laughed, and it's fun because, so what this is that if you aren't familiar, this is a set of images that used to trip up image recognition. So the blueberry muffins and the Chihuahua puppies, side by side in the images, you're like, ha ha ha, I can tell the difference between those, but AI couldn't. And so it was like, ha, we've got that on our side. Ha! Because now, if you go to a generative AI image tool and you say, what I prompted here was several Chihuahua puppies holding several blueberry muffins, voila, you've got, the recognition is there, right? This is no longer a limitation. I mean, don't look too closely at the puppy noses or the texture of the muffins. Avert your eyes. Like, it's uncanny and not very pretty. But again, AI is advancing all the time, right? We know this. And so we need to think about, how are we going to make the best of the situation? How are we going to make the best of what we know humans are good at and what we know machines are good at? And how are we going to adjust that as time goes on and we're good at different things and it's good at different things, right? Here's one way to think about this. Humans, all of us, hello humans, all of us, we have a pretty good understanding of what motivates us. There's a lot of organizational science out there that knows that we thrive on a sense of meaning, on a sense of common goals, and a sense of fulfilling something bigger than ourselves. Machines, if you work around machines at all, you know this to be true, thrive on succinct instructions. Get it clear, get it crisp, just give it to it in a succinct way. What's cool about this duality is that you can accomplish both of these things at the same time with purpose. Right? What we just talked about. The whole idea that the clearer you are about purpose, and the clearer you are about, I mean strategic organizational purpose. I mean that the idea that you're really trying to get down to brass tacks of what you exist to do as an organization. That makes both of these things better. And so you use human instinct around purpose, combined with machine efficiency around the clear instructions you've given it to do better work and to do more future-ready work. The work itself, the jobs themselves, the tasks and productivity themselves become more future-ready because they're infused by what both sides are good at. And it all comes down to that organizational purpose. It's pretty amazing. But here's one thing that I think is really important to catch, is that generative AI right now is in a window when it is low price. It's cheap. It's an affordability window that's not going to live forever. And so an awful lot of organizations are making the mistake of pivoting their entire work structure to using this and having a sort of baseline business model built around generative AI, and that's not going to be future ready. It might make good sense in the short term, strictly on a bottom line perspective, but it doesn't make good sense in the long term. And it doesn't make good sense when you want to rebuild trust inside the people and the culture, that you bring people back and say like, oh, sorry we let you go, but we want to make sure that we're rebuilding because Gen AI is too expensive now. So we need to be very conscious that we want to build the skills around AI and invest for later. Make sure we're building something that is sustainable, that does make sense for the long term. And one of the things that everybody is thinking about right now is how agents fit into this, how agentic AI, this concept of tools that do some things for you beyond what you're doing, how this all fits together. And so I have a model here. This will be in the packet of slides that you get. You're welcome to take a picture of it too if you like right now. But I think my company has come up with this model. I think it's a really important thing to understand how the human experience modality fits into this, how the connectedness fits into this, how we think about this from that human experience layer. I think it's really important for us to think that through. And I think it's important that we be thinking about the responsibility in the operating system, how we automate different processes using agentic AI or AI in general. AI first is a totally appropriate way to go about things as long as we're asking these questions. Can we do this safely? If yes, where do we bring humans into the mix, into the loop, so that they can add judgment, empathy, and escalation? And what data and guardrails and measurement do we need in the mix to define success? And how does this improve the associate and customer experience? Right? These are fair questions, and they ought to be at the beginning of every process that involves AI. And we need to think about those guardrails. We need to think about whether we've got the right kind of data, whether we've got error budgets, whether being transparent, and whether we have the right steps, and we have the authority of the person who can pause or roll back an agent. These are necessary guardrails. These are things that we need to be talking about more and more, and they need to be part of the projects that we're bringing AI into. We need to get very comfortable with this terminology, very comfortable with these discussions. They're just part of the mix now. And we need to do it in a way that makes sure that we're in charge of how purpose lands inside of these projects. Because we can't leave meaning up to machines to determine. Machines are going to do the assignment of meaning in a probabilistic way, and that may or may not work out for us. Right? We have to be the ones, as we keep assigning things to AI, you see this too, I'm sure, when you do projects with ChatGPT or whatever, you might get stuff back that you're like, yeah, that's cool. And you might get stuff back that you're like, huh? Like that, no. But you have to be constantly aware and constantly reviewing from the standpoint of, is this what I meant to do? Is this what I meant? Is this the purpose? Because machines don't create meaning, we do. We are the ones who are good at meaning. Machines, in fact, are what we encode of ourselves. We're putting all of our values and our biases into machines, and so the opportunity is for us to encode our best selves, for us to think clearly about the egalitarian views and the evolved understandings of the world that we encode in machines. So really, it's an opportunity right now for us to ask ourselves, what is it that we think matters next? We cannot leave meaning up to machines. We know that. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is it we're trying to do at scale? That purpose-centric view. What are you trying to do at scale? Because technology without humanity, it's just machinery. And we don't need more of that. We need that integrated view. We need the approach that's going to make the most sense of the most opportunity, and that's going to balance what is strategic and what is optimistic, right? What we hope for and what we want to manage against. That requires us to show up and not necessarily expect perfect technology, but make sure that we are the people who are harnessing perhaps imperfect technology in service of well-aligned intentions. It's important that we show up with well-aligned intentions because you are the leaders that are going to do that. You are going to be the ones who are bringing that about in the next wave. And I am so optimistic about what you're going to do with it and the future that we're all building together. So thank you once again very much for having me here. Thank you for making the future brighter.